Alright, so here we go. As you can see, I've already started some previous doodles. I tried doing a quick little test run, and yeah, basically it's just going to be silly little doodles like this. It's not really going to be much of, like, not too much of substance. But yeah, I hope the camera isn't too shaky, because I have kind of a slipshod kind of rig going on here. It's not really anything fancy or professional by any means, but let's just see about getting started here. And you know, it was, like I said in the update video, where I accidentally lied again. But yeah, I'm trying to have things be relatively easy on my end. I don't want it to feel like it's, you know, super, like, no effort content, but, you know, at the same time, I'm running out of stamina, so I just like to put something out there, I suppose. So I'm just going to start with something that I was already kind of thinking about. Basically, so I'm just going to start with a heart kind of shape that, you know, you just kind of recognize as like the emotional center, if you will. Draw a circle around it, because it's not literally your heart, it's just like the heart symbol is like a marker. But it's not specifically heart, it's more like a node. And we have, like, we'll start with like a few main different like little strings that are kind of like attached to it. And then we say that like each of these that like maybe you start out with is some sort of very like primal emotion, I suppose, or some other like thing that you feel, like maybe fear of the dark. Oops. Or maybe it would be I don't know, anger at competition, like, you know, competing for resources, maybe. You know, it doesn't really matter like what specifically it is that they're attached to, but basically each of these things has like some sort of value that's like, it's pretty close. And then like maybe a bit further out, we've got a few other ones that maybe like we acquire later on. So it might be like something pretty something that's not necessarily something that's related to anything like really critical. It might just be like low expectations from people who pair jeans with flip flops. And you know, it's not anything like really specific. It's just kind of like things that you figure out like through your life's context. It's just like, oh, well, you know, this is a telltale sign of like this other thing that happens, and it's not anything super important. It's just kind of like, oh, this is a pattern that I've recognized. And you know, so like for like these like thinner strings that are like a little bit further out, you know, if something's like pulling at them, then, you know, it's not going to affect you too much, because it's just going to be kind of like, oh, well, you know, I can probably easily overlook this. But when it's one of like these things that's like a bit bigger and much closer, then that's going to have much more force. So it's kind of like gravity almost with like its pull. It's much closer and it's much bigger, so it has like much more force pulling it. So it's much more likely to, you know, actually like get something going there. like get like more motion here for you to actually be like, oh wait, hold on a second, I'm feeling something. And I'm just like, I listed off negative examples here, but it could even be something like, uh, love for family. It could be something positive too. And then maybe over here it'd be, I don't know, trusting people who, uh, I don't know, like drawing. Um, you know, it could just be the kind of thing that's like, oh, well, like something that's like a lot closer because there's like actual, like, you know, the context for it is like a lot more deeply ingrained in like, just your humanity, like just being a person, versus something else that like you gain later on in life just through like learning a couple of different like experiences. Like, oh, I just so happen to notice that when I meet a fellow artist, it's like, oh, that tends to go over pretty well with them. They tend to be relatively like emotionally attuned to at least themselves and to other people, so I can feel relatively safe in confiding secrets with them or something. I don't know. It doesn't really matter what specifically is in each of these like bubbles. The point is just that it's like, oh, there's something here that might kind of like move you, so to speak. And so, unfortunately, we have to go back to the negativity, because there was like this kind of thing that it was like, I don't know, like, because you have like this sort of like uncanny valley kind of stuff where it's like, I'll use the other page as an example real quick, where it's like, oh, you have like a graph, and you have like a positive reaction, or a negative reaction, like emotional reaction, and this is likeness, or like how much it is like us. So over here you might have like a rock, or whatever, dirt, and it's like, okay, that's nothing like us. So pretty neutral about it, understandably. And then something more like us, like maybe like a tree or a flower or something. It's like, oh, it's not very much like us, but we can acknowledge like, oh, hey, it's a living thing. It grows, it feels, it tries to do its thing, just like we are. So maybe like a slight bit of positivity there, and then maybe like a bit more, where it's like, maybe like a bear cub or a puppy or something, where it's like, oh, isn't that amazing? These other things, these other creatures are also out here, and they're just kind of like, oh, they also start out small and kind of defenseless, just like our young does. And so, and then as it starts to get more like us, then it might be like start to kind of like curve off, because then it might be like, oh, wait, hold on, there's like the mama bear, and it's just like, oh, crap, you don't want to screw with her. That's because that's very dangerous. And we'll skip what's here for a moment. We'll come over here, and it's like, oh, hey, this is like a healthy, friendly person. Somebody. It's like, oh, hey, somebody that we know ourselves, and we know that we're good people, so we assume like, oh yeah. Maybe you see somebody that you don't know, so there's like, oh, hey, it's a little bit lower positive response, but still overall positive. It's like, oh, hey, somebody that I think I might have seen before, but it's like, whatever. And then a total stranger, you might be like, oh, hey, it's like relatively neutral. Or maybe somebody that you do know, but they're in maybe a little bit of a bad mood or whatever, so it's like, okay, yeah, whatever. And then maybe there's somebody that's like outright like angry, or maybe they've been badly hurt. It might elicit a very negative response, because it's like, oh, is this angry person going to hurt me? Or, oh, is this person that hurt, is like, whatever it is that hurt them, could that thing also hurt me? And so you start to get on the defensive. And then, maybe going a bit further, you have like, somebody that's like actually like coming at you, like trying to attack you, or somebody like seeing somebody that's been either horribly disfigured or is dead. That's not so great. And then maybe like coming back over here, you have some other like creature that like you haven't been able to identify before, something new. You're just like, oh god, what is that? I don't know what that is. It looks kind of familiar, but also not enough for me to know how to react. Is this thing fast? Is it slow? What should I do here? And so you know, you can kind of start to see where I'm going with this. The uncanny valley, for those of you that don't know. Uncanny. And so, you know, for the longest time, like, this was the extent of our, like, emotional graph, because, like, you know, there was only so many things. But with the advent of imagination and, you know, having, like, various ways of depicting things, like, instead of just, like, oh, you know, like, stick figures, like, okay, this is supposed to represent me. There's my head, there's my body, my legs, my arms. You know, it's me, but, you know, but then as, like, the times progress and people get more skilled, then it can be like, oh, wait, no, this is me, because, see, these are my eyes and my mouth, versus, you know, finally getting around to being like, oh, hey, you know, let's say we actually start to get in a little bit more detail where it's like, oh, hey, it's enough like me that it's like, whatever. My hair is kind of a mess anyways right now, so it's okay if we just muss this up a bit. But yeah, so it's like, oh, hey, that looks even more like me. So, you know, we're starting to be like, oh, hey, this barely looks like me. Starting to get up here. Oh, hey, it looks a bit more like me because we can actually see a face. Get up here, around, and then like, oh, hey, cartoon. And it's like, oh, hey, here. This is pretty cool. And then you start to get into, like, you know, those, like, weird animatronics where it's, like, very lifelike, but at the same time it's just barely off, where it's like, whoa, wait, what the hell is going on here? And so you basically have, like, this freaking black hole singularity type stuff, which is where our imagination starts to run wild. I'm gonna draw like a big old, like, it's like a black hole of emotions, you know. And so it's just the kind of thing that it's like, oh, well, you know, whatever, like, is like us but not quite, like, it might fall perfectly into this uncanny valley where it's just like, I don't really know how to feel about this, but it's really unsettling. So, you know, uncanny valley. So the thing that, like, had got me started on, like, thinking about this and this was that, like, I couldn't remember exactly, like, what specifically it was, but there was, like, this event in the past that was like, oh, hey, you know, there, like, or like a few events rather, there was like, oh, there's like something mysterious about Mudkip, or oh, there's something that sure is kind of like interesting, or there's like this mystique, or like, but then, like, so, like, that was like maybe like a slightly positive way to say it versus like a negative way to say it. Was like, something's a little off about that rocket ship guy, or whatever. So, you know, it could be like either way. So, like, the point is that there was like something about me. There was like, I think it was 2 years ago now. It was a thing for Halloween where, like, I had made a prop that was like, oh, hey, you know, I'm gonna go ahead and be like, the costume idea is like, yeah, my eyes have been gorged out or something, and, you know, like, all you can see is like this, like, awful bloodied bandage. And so, you know, in the context of Halloween, it's like, okay, obviously that's a prop. It's not that somebody, like, actually gouged their eyes out. But I guess there was something about me that for just a hot second, like, a couple of my friends, well, my then friends, we haven't spoken in a while, but one of some of my then friends, like, for just a moment thought, wait, did he actually gouge his eyes out for a costume idea? And, you know, it was the kind of thing that I thought, oh, haha, that's very funny, that's iconic. Because it's like, oh, you know, that wouldn't that be crazy if he did it just for the memes? But it was the kind of thing that was like, okay, well, there is something to be said there, though, because it was like, what if it wasn't specifically about, oh, what if he actually did it for the memes? Because, you know, I don't usually meme that hard, but apparently there was something that was, like, mysterious or something like inherently unknown about me that was like that it felt like maybe, just maybe, it could be very in character for me. And so it just kind of made me think, wow, that actually seems like it could have been in character for me from people that, maybe know a bit about me, but maybe didn't previously know, for instance, that maybe I used to self harm, or maybe that I had been dealing with a lot of difficult things emotionally or whatever that might drive me to maybe not specifically this, but something that was like, yeah, something about as drastic as that. And so it just kind of felt strange that I hadn't really given, I didn't think I had given that much of myself away, that it was like, oh, like this would that would feel like a very logical conclusion. I hadn't said anything about self-harm. I hadn't said anything about like, oh, I'm so messed up, oh, I'm on the edge or whatever. It just like just completely out of the blue, and they still felt like, yeah, maybe that could have actually happened. And so I thought, it got me thinking back to that uncanny valley about like the mysteriousness of the unknown, because that's the thing about the uncanny valley, is that it's a lot of it is like, oh, I don't know how to react in this situation, it's scary. So it's like, oh, I guess there's something deeply unknown, almost uncanny, if you will. Maybe slightly closer to this side, since I'd even been able to make friends with them, but still pretty, like starting to get uncomfortably close to that, like, center. And so something about it just felt very saddening, I suppose. I don't know if saddening is the right word, but it just kind of felt like, I don't know if isolating is, but anyways, the point was that like it was just very confusing, and I didn't really know like how specifically, like maybe they might have been able to guess that that could be something about me. And so it started to get me thinking like, oh, well, maybe there are things that we do know that definitely bring us into the uncanny valley, but maybe there are things that we don't even know would start to make us question what we do know. Like the whole thing of like, oh, the more I know, the more I know I don't know, or like how many problems do we not know about, And so it's like, maybe it's the same kind of thing where it's like, maybe there's like these like strings that are like very thin and they're very far out there, but they're so far out there that we can't actually see them. It's in like, I guess, an internal blind spot, if you will, where it's like, there's something like way out there, or maybe even it's something that's like, like there's like so many strings that, we get through our lifetime that, they all start to get muddied together, and it kind of starts to become difficult to tell, which string goes where or whatnot. But maybe there's like something like in the middle here that like, like whatever quality it is, but we don't know what specific, like we know that it's something specific, but we just don't know what that thing is. And so, maybe we do know when it's being tugged at, or maybe we don't even know it's being tugged at. It's like, oh, is it this one? Is it this one? Is it this one? Or we don't even realize it's being tugged at first until we actually take a moment to analyze. But my point is that it's like, oh, hey, what if there's something here that like just very lightly gave the slightest tug. It wasn't enough to like immediately like, oh, set you off like, oh, hey, hold on, something's not quite right here. But at the same time, it still had an effect. There was like enough like there to like at least like have something going on in the back of your mind. So it just sort of felt like maybe one of my, I don't know, I suppose possibly intrinsic qualities was this kind of mid-tier kind of thing that wasn't quite like, a primal sense that you'd like immediately be able to identify it, but at the same time it wasn't quite like way out here that it was like, oh, well, yeah, it's basically nothing. It's easy to overlook. It's something that's not quite easy to overlook with me, but at the same time it was something that was, oh, hey, I can't quite point to what specifically it is. It's something kind of weird that's in the middle. So, I just thought it was kind of a weird thing. I've always had a little bit of trouble making friends, but, the point of this wasn't for me to try to be an edgelord. It was, just drawing out some things that I'd been thinking about. I mean, that's one of the many things you can do with drawing, is just kind of express yourself. I'll go ahead and just kind of... what the heck. Let's just do quick little crummy doodles of our main cast here. So we've got Mudship, Rocket Ship, 2003. So, main guy, me. I guess the head of the team. Yours truly. Let's see. OCs. Yeah, I know we're gonna start getting into that kind of territory. I don't know if it's like necessarily Mystery Dungeon OCs, but I do know that a lot of influence comes from Mystery Dungeon, because honestly that game was like my emotional maturing. I don't know what the term is. I emotionally grew up with that game. Let's see, so we've got our main partner here. I mean, they're all equally important, but, in order of discovery, I suppose, if you will. We've got Ms. Torchic Flick 101. Then we've got... let's try to get the head shape correct there. We've got... Ms. Sny Virgent. Let's see. Let's start to go over here so we don't immediately run out of space down there. We've got... I mean, obviously no team is complete without one of these. We've got... let's get that filled in just so we know. Got Pika Friday. There's like a bit of naming conventions here, specifically rhymes, and then there's like these two are like film titles. Like I kind of thought were like, wow, iconic film titles, like the freaking movie Divergent. It was like, wow, that seems like the nerd equivalent of Edge kind of shit, or like, oh, I'm not like other girls, except I'm not like other nerds, even though you kind of are. But at the same time, the point is like, it's not to bash on anyone, it's just kind of like, oh, that's an amazing title. Freaky Friday, except that one's kind of like a bit more of a stretch, but anyways. And then we've got, let's see, whatever. We can just sort of be like, oops, there we go, a little more rounded off. Got one of these guys because he's got bigger ears. He's got that thing. We've got ourselves a pantsier on this team, and like these next two guys have a bit of the reverse order naming convention. So like we've got short pants, so like the given name versus the surname, and then we've got... Let's put this guy over here. Oops. Kind of messed these up a little bit, but that's okay. Let's go ahead and put you there. We've got tube socks. Okay, so this is more or less, so that was like more or less the order of like, oh, hey, definitely this character, and then, yeah, next to next. So the story of this is like, okay, so like, it started out that like the first like, oh, like any Pokemon game that I'd ever owned was Pokemon Sapphire, that I had initially kind of like started to borrow from one of my grade school friends, but then it was just kind of like, oh, you know what, here, yeah, just go ahead and have it because I'm done with it now. So I was like, oh, okay, cool, thanks. I still have it to this day. It's a treasured relic. But yeah, I was like, ooh, I don't know which partner I'm gonna pick. So like, so they show me Trico first, and I'm like, oh yeah, he seems pretty cool. Pretty nice. He's a very nice shade of green. Green was my favorite color, so I thought, ooh, hard consideration. I mean, was my favorite color. Green is my favorite color. But anyways, we had like, oh, hey, is it going to be Trico? And it's like, okay, wait. I got to give everyone a fair chance. Let's check the next one. And it shows me Torchic, and I'm like, oh, this one's pretty cute. This one's pretty nice design overall. Definitely hard consideration there. I'll come back to you. And then taking a look at the last one, then like just like something about the sprite that Mudkip has in that game, like it wasn't even so much a thing of like, oh, I want that one. It was more just a thing of like, this, yes. Like the only thought that came to my mind was yes, or just kind of like, ooh, me. And so I just felt like this really like weird like connection to it. It wasn't necessarily like, it wasn't specifically like, oh, that is me. I mean, I don't know, maybe. I can't claim to know the way things work all the time, but you know, it was just kind of like, wow, this is pretty great. I need this. So, you know, then later when one of my other friends had introduced me to the Mystery Dungeon series, obviously I knew who I had to try to go for in the personality quizzes. But yeah, and then the story of you is a very long one, but I guess the shorter version of it is that it's like, oh, you know, playing through Explorers of Time, Mystery Dungeon Explorers of Time, it was like, oh, well, let's see, who should my partner be? Well, I suppose I can go with Torchic since that was my second favorite starter. And so then, like, you know, the whole subtext of, oh, well, perhaps maybe your partner isn't the same gender or sex or whatever as you or whatever. And then there was like I was like, oh, hey, this is a really interesting dynamic of like the partner of like you being like the usual hero, but we don't hear much from you because it's supposed to be you. And then the partner who's like kind of timid, but also like, oh, you know, being timid is where true courage comes from, because it's like, you know, overcoming that fear. And so I was like, oh, that's a really cool character development. So I just kind of stuck with her. And then I think at some point, right, I don't remember like specifically how I'd kind of like, I was like, oh yeah, Snivy. But I think, well, actually, perhaps that is a story that I should probably not disclose right away, because YouTube is doing some kind of very interesting things lately. But let's just say for now that it was maybe the kind of thing that would be like, wah, wah, wah. I mean, I don't have my channel monetized, but, you know, I better play it safe anyways, because Emperor Lemon got his videos shafted even though he hadn't monetized them to begin with, or like the little experiment that he did. Anyways, so I guess the family friendly way of saying it was, this is just kind of like, kind of an interesting starter from the newest generation that's come out lately. And, Mud kept being like the older meme, and I was like, okay, obviously I gotta stay up with the times, the newer meme, because Snivy was very heavily memed Pokemon when Black and White was first teased. It was like, this very smug leaf. That was what everyone called Snivy back then before they knew what it was called, smug leaf. But anyways, and then I think I just kind of... okay, so the story with you is that it was like somebody had found me like like one of those like little like figures that has like the little like, and it has like this extra like thing that like is like, actually like it ejects like this little disc and you can send it flying or whatever. I don't know, like some sort of toy, I guess. And so like it had like Snivy as like the main thing, but then it had like these little like cardboard cutouts. It was just kind of like, it was just kind of like, I guess they were supposed to act as targets, but I was like, nah, we're not doing target practice here. We're going to have assigned characters to these other ones. I think the other one in the box was an Oshawott, but I was like, nah, obviously we got to like stick with some classics here. And then I think it was just like, I was just bored one time seeing like what like practicing like art stuff, like, like I drew some eyelashes onto the Pikachu. And I was like darkening like these things on the ears, and then there was like the tail, and it was like the usual one. And I was like, wait, I just drew eyelashes, so let's say that this is not an assigned male at birth Pikachu, and let's just be like, yeah. There we go. Now it's like and then when I actually went to look at what it actually, the sexual dimorphism looks like officially, then it was more like that kind of thing. I thought, darn. And then I thought like, let's add some backstory. What if it was like the old generation, like the sort of like old generation, like the Kanto like specific region of Pikachu, they don't have that sexual dimorphism, but once you like go into the Unova region, then they do have the sexual dimorphism. Then it's like, hey, wait a minute, that makes for an interesting thing. What if she got bullied a lot because she didn't have the sexual dimorphism, so they're like, just a stupid boy, and so then she was like, no, I'm not, and so she cut the little thingy in her tail herself, and even though it was painful, she was like, I gotta do it so that they stop making fun of me. But then, she eventually just kind of embraced the tomboyish side, so that it kind of like came full circle, and so it wasn't like a super sad story all the way through. And then I think, so like I have to admit that half of the story here was, I was like, wait a minute, blue, orange, green, yellow, I gotta have the full rainbow now. And it hadn't occurred to me, but I was like, wait a minute, we've got 4 here, and we're missing 2 colors, so it'll be like 6, like a full like party of 6 that you have in the main game. So I was like, oh my god, okay, so now I need to do 2 more. So like I was like, okay, a good starting point is like, let's see if maybe we can complete the whole like color wheel kind of thing. And so I was like, ooh, the Purloin is a very nice shade of purple, so that'll be like perfect. And so like I was kind of like going back and forth between a couple different ones, but I ultimately decided on Pansear just because it was like, okay, I think I like the design overall a bit more. And I thought like, that is kind of a bit of a bummer that it was like, fire type, but then I thought, no, she can be the one to be like, I'll focus more on the flying moves that I learned, like Peck. But I ultimately scrapped that in the end, but it was like, more of like the pure fire versus like, hey, he learns a lot of other types of moves. Like I think at one point he could learn rock smash, and then there was, I don't remember if it was low kick or low sweep. It was either kick or sweep, but either way it was like, hey, that's kind of interesting. And I thought, what if he's like more like like he's fire type, but we'll just acknowledge him as fighting type. And but anyways, yeah. So then yeah, we've got our team, and at some point or another, because like going through the Mystery Dungeon series, I was like, okay, so these two have to be a pair, and then since these two were the next two, they have to be the pair, and then since these guys were the last two, they have to be a pair. So then I was like, okay, so what's the name of like each of their like smaller groups, and then we'll have a name of like the bigger group altogether. For context, me and the friend that introduced me to Mystery Dungeon were like, oh, let's just have the conglomerate name be Meepers. I don't even remember how we got on that, but yeah, Team Meepers for the longest time. But anyways, I started calling these two the first aids, like first aid, because like, oh, like first aid, like medical attention, but then aid, like just coming to help just in general, because it was like, even though it was like their personalities were derived from, or your personality was derived from explorers, since the first game I started with was rescuers, it was like, oh, it was more focused on just like the like helping them. And then it was like, it was like, oh hey, the action pack, because like that one just sort of came to me. I was like, oh hey, actually that would make for a really cool name. And then I don't remember how I equalizers. Okay, so technically this is incorrect. You're supposed to write it in all caps because equalizers. I don't remember the exact story behind how I came up with their name, but it was just kind of like, oh, like this team is more about like helping people like when they're behind, helping people to get ahead, and then it was like, oh, what about like for all of the stuff that's in between? And it was like, okay, leveling the playing field, like, okay, no more of people being like ahead of you or like anyone else being behind or whatever. Let's just like keep everything fair and just have it be like, oh, everything is equal. And yeah, we can get to know them a bit more later. But for now, I think this should be pretty good for this episode. But anyways, yeah, had a bit of fun just kind of drawing and explaining and just kind of chit-chatting. And hopefully, maybe, you might want to come back to see more of my drawing and hear me ranting about different random things from my past. Haha. Anyways, thank you guys so much for watching, and yeah, I'll see you guys hopefully sooner than later. Hopefully I'm not lying again. Anyways, Market of Rocket Ship 3003, signing out.